Sergeant James Hawk walked down the dusty, cracked street of what used to be a thriving city on Earth. The air smelled faintly of smoke and dust, reminders of the war that had nearly destroyed everything. A war that had taken years, millions of lives, and the very soul of humanity. Now, with the final battle behind them, there was only silence, a silence that weighed heavily on James's heart. The Galactic War had been brutal. Humans were outnumbered, outgunned, and yet they fought on. But the cost was high. Earth had become a battlefield, cities were reduced to rubble, and the people James had once known were now gone. The war had stolen his youth, his friends, his purpose, and now, as he walked through what was left of his home, it was difficult to remember who he had been before all of this. The war had changed him, just as it had changed everyone. James had been a soldier since he was 18, and now, after 5 long years of fighting, he was finally home. Or what was left of it. The scars of the war were everywhere. His boots crunched over broken glass and twisted metal as he passed empty buildings that once held families, businesses, and life. The hum of what little technology still worked seemed almost out of place in the silence. He had hoped that returning home would bring him some peace, but it hadn't. There was a ceremony, of course, to honor the soldiers who survived. The governments of the galaxy, those that remained, had given their gratitude, but that gratitude felt empty. What was the point of peace if you were the only one left to experience it? James had seen things, done things, and had witnessed the worst of humanity. And now he was being asked to put it all behind him, to live as if nothing had happened. But how could he? As he walked, he was met by a man in a white uniform, the symbol of the Intergalactic Union embroidered on his chest. The man was young, probably not much older than James had been when the war began. His face showed the exhaustion of a galaxy that had been torn apart, but there was something else in his eyes, something that James couldn't quite place. "Sergeant Hawk," the man said, his voice crisp, professional. "We've been expecting you." James stopped in his tracks and turned to face the man.
"Expecting me?"
He raised an eyebrow. "For what?"
The man handed James a small data pad, which James took hesitantly.
"You've been assigned a gift as a reward for your service." The man's tone was polite, but there was an underlying sense of urgency, as though he was trying to push something onto James that he wasn't sure about. James's brow furrowed. A gift? After everything he had seen and done, the last thing he wanted was a gift. What could they possibly offer him that would make up for the pain he had endured? Still, his curiosity got the better of him, and he scanned the datapad. The words on the screen were simple, but strange.
"A reward of your choice is to be delivered. Please proceed to the designated location for instructions."
James felt a lump form in his throat. A reward? He didn't feel like a hero, not after everything he had lost. His thoughts drifted to his fallen comrades, their faces blurred, their voices faded. What could anyone give him that would make any of it worth it? "Where am I supposed to go?" James asked, his voice low. The man nodded toward the shuttle waiting on the landing pad. "It's all arranged. Everything you need to know is on the pad." He hesitated for a moment before adding, "I believe this will help you, Sergeant." James didn't feel like he needed help. He wasn't sure what he needed, or even if he needed anything at all. But as he walked toward the shuttle, his thoughts were filled with doubt and confusion. What could they possibly want from him now? And what did this mysterious reward mean? The shuttle ride was quiet, the hum of the engines the only sound as the craft cut through the atmosphere. James looked out the window, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. The planet he called home was scarred, broken, but still standing. He was here, alive, and for that, he supposed he should be grateful. But the war had taken so much from him, and now the galaxy expected him to simply move on, to forget. He wasn't sure he could. After what seemed like hours, the shuttle finally landed in a secluded area, far from the city. James stepped out, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. The air here was different, Fresher, cleaner, almost alien. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The shuttle's doors slid shut behind him, and he was left standing alone on the landing pad. A door in the distance opened, revealing a man in a black uniform. This man was older, his face weathered, his eyes cold and calculating. He motioned for James to follow, and as James walked toward him, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of unease. There was something about this place that felt wrong, but he pushed it aside. "You're here for the reward, Sergeant Hawk," the man said, his voice low, his accent unfamiliar. "You will be introduced to her shortly." James didn't respond, his mind racing with questions. What did they mean by her? The man led James into a large, sterile building. The walls were smooth, the floors polished to a shine. There was an odd, metallic smell in the air, and everything felt too clean, too controlled. At the center of the room was a large cage, its bars gleaming under the bright lights. Inside, a figure sat, her head bent down, her long, silver-blue hair cascading over her shoulders like a waterfall of starlight. She was beautiful, impossibly so. Her skin shimmered in the artificial light, and her features were delicate, almost ethereal. James stopped in his tracks, unable to look away. She was unlike anything he had ever seen. An alien, certainly, but with a grace that seemed otherworldly. Her eyes, when she lifted her head, were the color of the deepest galaxies, dark and filled with 1,000 unspoken stories. "She is your reward," the man said, his voice carrying no warmth. "Her name is Genara, a survivor of the Tenthra species. She has been assigned to you as a token of your service." James swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. "A slave?" he asked, the word feeling heavy in his mouth. The man gave a curt nod. Yes, damn, a slave. The last of her kind. You will take her, and she will serve you." James stared at Genara, his mind racing. This wasn't what he had expected. He had been prepared for something else, something to ease his pain. But not this, not a captive woman who was to be given as a reward. Genara's gaze met his, and for the briefest moment, something flickered in her eyes. Anger, fear, perhaps even defiance. She didn't want to be here, just as much as he didn't want her here. But there was no choice, no way out. The man stepped forward, pushing James toward the cage. "You have your order, Sergeant!" "She's yours now." James hesitated, his hand resting on the cold metal bars of the cage. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly uncertain. What was he supposed to do with her? Was this the price of peace, enslaving another species? He turned back to the man. "I don't want her." The man's eyes narrowed. "She is yours, Sergeant. You will take her, and you will learn to value her." James shook his head. "I don't know how." But as Genara's eyes met his once more, he knew that something was about to change. He wasn't sure what, but he knew that this was only the beginning of a story neither of them could control. James stood frozen in place, staring at the alien woman, Genara, locked behind the gleaming bars of her cage. The harsh, cold, metallic lights above cast a dull glow on her face, and she seemed to be studying him just as intently. Her eyes were dark and filled with a quiet intelligence. But there was also something else there, a sense of longing, of pain that she could not hide. He could see it now. Beneath the surface of the perfect alien beauty, there was something far deeper, a woman who had suffered. The man in the black uniform stood at James's side, watching silently. He didn't seem to notice the weight of the moment, or perhaps he just didn't care. James was still processing the absurdity of it all. A reward for his service. A beautiful alien slave. He had imagined many things when he received the vague message, but this was not one of them.
"You'll take her?" the man said, his voice blunt, as if stating a fact.
She's yours now." James's gaze shifted back to Genara. She didn't look like a slave. She didn't look like someone who belonged in a cage. She looked like someone who had been forced into a role that wasn't hers to play. Her silver blue skin shimmered slightly in the artificial light, her long hair falling in waves around her shoulders. The way she held herself, tall, proud, but with a sadness in her eyes, made James feel a pang of guilt. He felt anger rising within him. How could they do this to her? And why was he part of it? Was this truly his reward? To enslave someone else to somehow ease the pain of a war that had stolen everything from him? James slowly moved closer to the cage. Janara's eyes never left him. Her expression was unreadable, but James could sense her wariness, as if she was preparing herself for whatever was coming next. He reached out tentatively, his fingers brushing against the cool metal bars of the cage. The man in the black uniform stepped back, watching him with cold detachment. "You have your orders, Sergeant?"
"She is to be your property. She will serve you in whatever way you desire,"
the man said, his tone matter-of-fact. "Do not hesitate. This is the final step of your assignment. The war is over, and this is your reward." James felt a sharp bitterness rise in his throat. This was supposed to be his reward? After everything, after the destruction, the loss of life, this was what he got? A woman who had been reduced to nothing more than a tool, a slave to be used at his whim? The very thought disgusted him. I don't want her," James muttered under his breath. The man's eyes narrowed.
You don't have a choice.
James looked at Janara again. She had been quiet so far, but now her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something. For a moment he thought she might speak, but then her eyes dropped to the floor, and the moment passed. "Why?" James asked quietly. "Why is she here?" The man didn't respond right away. Instead, he stepped forward, his voice low and stern.
"She is the last of her kind, the extra race."
After the war, her people were decimated. She is a symbol of that destruction, a captive for humanity's so-called victory. But she is also a reminder of how fragile peace really is.
"You will take her with you and return her to your quarters. That is your duty, Sergeant."
James felt a weight settle in his chest. Janara, a survivor of the Tethra species, had been forced into this position, just as humanity had been forced to fight for its survival.
"But what about her? She was not a symbol."
She was a person. His thoughts were jumbled. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know how to make this right. The man turned to leave, but James called out to him. "Wait." The man paused, but didn't turn around.
"What is it? Why me?" James asked, his voice rising with frustration.
Why did they choose me to take her? The man remained silent for a moment, as if contemplating the answer. Then he finally spoke. "Because you survived, Sergeant. You lived when so many others didn't."
Whoa.
The galaxy needs people like you to rebuild.
"And Janara."
She is your responsibility now. She is to be yours, as payment for your sacrifices. Her fate, as with yours, is now tied to this new era. With that, the man laughed, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. James stood there for a moment, lost in thought. He looked back at Janara, who was now standing, her body tense, waiting for him to make the next move. He couldn't bear to see her like this. She was a prisoner, enslaved not by her choice, but by the cruel hands of a galaxy that saw her as nothing more than a trophy. And now he was expected to claim her, to keep her as his own. He had never been good with orders, and this felt wrong. She wasn't his to own. She wasn't anyone's to own. With a deep breath, James stepped forward, unlocking the cage. The soft click of the lock was almost deafening in the silence. Janara didn't move at first. She only watched him carefully, her eyes searching his face. "Come with me," James said quietly, his voice betraying the uncertainty in his chest. He wasn't sure what else to say. Gennara didn't speak. She just nodded, slowly and hesitantly. As she stepped out of the cage, her movements were graceful, but there was something in her posture that told James she was used to being guarded, restrained. They walked together in silence. James didn't know what to say, and Gennara didn't offer anything either. The silence between them was heavy, charged with unspoken words and emotions neither of them knew how to express. They reached the shuttle pad, and James guided Gennara inside. She sat down silently, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the floor. James sat across from her, unsure of what to do next. What could he offer her? A cage of her own was no way to live, even if it was a nicer one. He had nothing to offer her but the same emptiness that plagued him. As the shuttle began to rise, James looked out the window, the planet growing smaller beneath them. He felt a pang of loss, not just for the war, but for everything that had been taken from him, from them. There was no going back. The war had changed everything, and now, as if to add insult to injury, the galaxy had handed him a woman in chains, as some sort of prize. He had fought for peace, but what kind of peace was this? Gennara shifted in her seat, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to keep me." She had been so quiet, so distant, but now there was something raw, something vulnerable in her voice. "I'm not sure I can free you," James said, his voice strained with uncertainty. "But I don't want to keep you as some possession." He paused, trying to find the right words. "I don't know what to do, Gennara. I don't know how to make this right." Gennara looked up at him then, her dark eyes meeting his. For the first time, she smiled, a small, tentative smile. But it was enough. "You don't have to make it right," she said softly. "You just have to try." And in that moment, James realized that perhaps that was all they could do. Try to understand each other, try to find a way forward, because in the end, there was no simple solution to the mess they had inherited. All they could do now was move forward. Together, James sat silently in the shuttle, staring out the window as the stars passed by. Gennara had not spoken since their brief conversation earlier. She had remained quiet, her body stiff, eyes focused on the floor. It was clear that the weight of her situation was heavy on her shoulders, and James could feel the tension between them, a distance that neither of them knew how to bridge. He couldn't help but wonder how she felt, knowing that she was no longer just a survivor of her people's destruction, but now someone's property. He didn't want to treat her like that. She wasn't an object, a thing to be owned. But what could he do? He was just one soldier, and the galaxy's systems were far beyond him. It was out of his hands, or so he thought. As the shuttle moved toward its destination, James's thoughts turned back to the war. The destruction, the battles, the faces of the soldiers he had lost. His comrades, his friends. He had fought alongside people who had given everything for their cause, and many had not returned. Some had died in his arms, others in explosions, but all of them had been forgotten by the galaxy. They were nothing more than casualties of a war fought by powers far too large for them to understand. And now, even after the war was over, it seemed like they were still fighting for something they could never truly grasp. James looked at Gennara, and for a moment his mind raced. What was her role in all this? She had been caught in the web of a galaxy's conflict, her people crushed by a war they hadn't started. She was a slave now, but she wasn't just a symbol of defeat. She was a person, with a history, a past, and a future that she had been denied. Gennara finally broke the silence. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. James blinked, surprised by the question. He had thought about it many times, but hearing her ask it made him realize that he hadn't really come to terms with it himself. "I don't know," he replied honestly. I was told to take you and I didn't think about it much. I thought I had no choice.
Janara tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. But now?
Do you think you have a choice? James thought about it for a long moment. What was he really doing? Was he just following orders, or was there something more to this? He wasn't sure anymore. Everything had felt like it was part of the war. Missions, orders, survival. But now that the fighting was over, he had been left with this strange situation. A woman who was supposed to be a slave, a symbol of his reward, but someone who deserved so much more than that. I think I've made a mistake, he admitted quietly. I don't want to be part of this system. You're not my slave.
I don't even know why they gave you to me. You don't deserve this.
Janara met his gaze. Her eyes were calm, almost serene. But there was a sadness there that James could not ignore.
I know, she said simply, but I have no choice either.
The words hit him harder than he expected. She had no choice. She never had one. She was a victim of the same war that had claimed so much of his own life, a prisoner of circumstances beyond her control, just as he was a prisoner of his past. James let out a long sigh, running his hands through his hair in frustration. I don't know what to do, he muttered. I don't know how to fix this. Gennaro was silent for a while before speaking again. Maybe fixing things isn't the goal. Maybe it's about finding a way forward, together. James looked at her, surprised by her words. He had been so focused on trying to make things right, trying to fix a broken system, that he hadn't stopped to consider that there might be no perfect solution. Maybe the key wasn't fixing the past, but building something new out of the pieces that remained. You're right, he said slowly. I don't have to fix everything. Maybe I just need to stop trying to control things.
Janara gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile.
It wasn't much, but it was enough to make James feel like there was still hope, still a chance for something good to come out of all this. As the shuttle continued its journey, James realized that he didn't have all the answers. No one did. The galaxy was still broken, still reeling from the aftermath of the war, and he was just one man, trying to find his place in it. But maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to do it alone. They arrived at their destination, a small, nondescript building that looked like many others on the planet. It was nothing special, but it would be their home for now. James had been given a place to stay, a place to keep Janara. But the reality of their situation was clear. They were both trapped in a system that didn't care about them, a system that had used them as pawns in a game of power and survival. Inside the building, everything was sterile and cold, the walls a dull gray, the air thick with the smell of artificial cleanliness. James felt uneasy as they walked through the hallways, the silence between them growing heavier with each step. He wanted to say something, to ease the tension, but he didn't know what to say. Janara, on the other hand, was surprisingly calm. Her movements were graceful, almost fluid, as she followed him down the narrow corridors. She didn't seem to be bothered by the coldness of the place, nor did she seem to mind being in the presence of a man who had no idea how to treat her. When they reached the room that had been assigned to them, James opened the door, revealing a simple living space. It was small but functional, with a bed, a small table, and a few chairs. There was no warmth to it, no comfort. It was a place to sleep, to eat, and little more. Still, it was better than the cold cage she had been kept in.
This is where we'll be staying, James said as he gestured to the room. It's not much, but it's better than nothing.
Janara stepped inside and looked around. It will do, she said quietly. Thank you. James nodded, feeling a pang of guilt. He had no idea how to make her feel comfortable, how to make her feel safe. All he could offer was this cold, impersonal room. It was the best he could do, but it didn't feel like enough. As the evening wore on, James tried to make small talk, but Janara remained distant. She wasn't cold, but she was guarded, careful with her words. He couldn't blame her. She had been through so much, and now she was stuck in a situation that neither of them had asked for. Finally, after a long silence, James spoke up. I'm sorry for what's happened to you. I didn't ask for this either. I don't know how to make it right, but I promise I'll do my best to make sure you're treated with respect. Gennara looked at him, her gaze softening for the first time. I know you didn't choose this, but sometimes, even when we don't choose something, we still have the power to decide what we do with it. Her words hit him harder than anything else she had said. He realized then that she was right. He didn't have to accept this situation as fate. He could choose to change it, to make a difference in the small ways that mattered. It wouldn't fix everything, but it was a start. For the first time since the war ended, James felt a sense of purpose. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew that he couldn't leave things as they were. Gennara deserved more than this, more than what the galaxy had given her, and maybe, together, they could find a way to build something better. As the night drew to a close, they both sat in silence, each lost in their thoughts. There was still so much uncertainty ahead, so much they didn't understand. But for the first time, James felt like there was a glimmer of hope. They would figure this out, one step at a time. James woke up early the next morning, his mind already filled with thoughts of the day ahead. The room was still dim, the first rays of light from the sun filtering through the blinds. He glanced over at Gennara, who was sitting by the window, her back straight, her eyes looking out into the distance. She hadn't moved much since they arrived the night before, and her silence was almost like a presence in the room. She wasn't exactly distant, but she wasn't fully present either. It was as if she was still somewhere else, far away, in a world that James couldn't understand. He had been trying to figure out what to do with her, how to make their situation work. Every day, it felt like there was no right answer. The galaxy had thrown them together, but that didn't mean they understood each other, or that the path ahead would be any easier. He had thought he was just bringing her to a safe place, but now, standing in this sterile room, the reality of the situation felt more complicated than ever. Gennara turned her head slightly, her gaze meeting his. "You're awake?" she said quietly, her voice as calm and composed as always. James nodded, forcing a smile. Couldn't sleep much. Too much on my mind. She didn't respond right away, but her eyes seemed to soften. It was the first time James had seen that look in her. An unspoken understanding. She wasn't just a slave, a prisoner, or a symbol of something bigger. She was a person. And maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to make this work.
I don't know what to do, he admitted after a long pause.
I don't know how to fix what's broken. Gennara's expression remained neutral, but there was something in her eyes that made James feel like she understood exactly what he was saying. No, one can fix everything, she said softly. But we can try to change what we can. We can start by not accepting things as they are. James sighed, walking over to the small table in the corner of the room. I've been thinking about that a lot. The war, everything that happened. It feels like we're all just trying to pick up the pieces and pretend everything's fine. But it's not. Not for me, and not for you. Gennara stood up, her movements graceful as always, and walked over to him. She paused a few feet away, not saying anything, just looking at him with a calmness that seemed almost otherworldly. Then, in a voice that was both steady and gentle, she spoke. You're right, she said.
The war took so much from us. It took everything from my people.
And it took parts of you too, didn't it? James met her gaze, the weight of her words sinking in.
Yeah, it did.
I lost more than I ever thought I would. But it's not just the war. It's what comes after. The way we're all supposed to move on as if it never happened. As if we can just go back to living like everything's fine. Gennara's eyes softened as she stepped closer. You're not alone in this, she said quietly.
We both know what it's like to lose, to be left with nothing.
But maybe that's why we need to make our own choices now. Because we can't keep waiting for someone else to fix things. James was silent for a moment, taking in her words. There was something about the way she spoke that made him feel like she understood more than just the pain of loss. It was as if she had lived through something deeper, something he couldn't even begin to imagine. And maybe, just maybe, she was right. Maybe they didn't need to fix everything. Maybe all they needed to do was make their own choices, no matter how small they were. "I don't know what that means for you," he said after a long pause. "But I do know that I don't want to keep you in a cage."
"I don't want you to feel like you're trapped. I want to help you, Gennara."
"I just don't know how." She studied him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face, as if she was looking for something she hadn't seen before. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but firm. "You've already helped me by being different from what I expected," she said. "You didn't look at me and see a slave." "You saw a person. That's a start." James felt a strange warmth spread through him. He had never thought of himself as someone who could make a difference. He had always been just another soldier, another piece in the war machine. But now, standing here with Gennara, he felt like maybe he could be more than that. Maybe he could choose to do something better. Later that day, they went out into the city. It was a small, broken place, still trying to rebuild itself after the war. But there was life here. People going about their business, trying to make sense of a world that had been turned upside down.
James had lived here once, but now everything felt different.
The streets were quieter, the buildings emptier. The sense of hope that had once filled the air seemed to have been replaced by a kind of weary resignation. People had survived, yes, but at what cost? As they walked through the streets, James couldn't help but notice how people reacted to Gennara. They stared at her, some with curiosity, others with fear. She was an alien, yes, but she was also different from the others. The way she carried herself, the way her silver-blue skin seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. It was as if she didn't belong here. James could feel the eyes on them, the judgment, the whispers behind their backs. Gennara seemed to feel it too, her posture tightening slightly, her movements becoming more guarded. He could tell she was trying to stay calm, trying not to let it show. But it was clear that she was uncomfortable, perhaps even afraid.
"Let's get out of here,"
James said quietly, his voice filled with concern. He could see how uneasy she was, and he didn't want to make her stay in a place that was so hostile to her. Gennara nodded, and they turned to leave, heading toward a quieter part of the city. The further they walked, the more James began to realize how much of the world around him had changed. It wasn't just the buildings or the streets or the people. It was the feeling in the air. The war had taken its toll, but it had also left something else behind. Fear, suspicion, and a lack of trust between the different races. When they finally reached a small park on the edge of the city, they sat on a bench, watching the world go by. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the horizon. James didn't speak at first. He was lost in his thoughts, thinking about everything that had happened, everything that was still left to be done. Gennara broke the silence.
"Do you ever wonder if it's all worth it?" she asked. "All the fighting, all the destruction."
"Do you think it made a difference?" James didn't answer right away. The question hung in the air, and he realized that it was a question he had been asking himself for a long time. Had the war been worth it? Had the suffering been justified? Was there even a reason for it all?
"I don't know," he said finally.
"I don't know if it was worth it, but I know that I'm here, and you're here."
And that has to count for something. Gennara looked at him, her eyes thoughtful. "Maybe it's not about the past," she said. "Maybe it's about what we choose to do with what we have left. Maybe that's the only thing that matters now." James turned to look at her, his heart filled with a strange mixture of hope and uncertainty. He didn't know where this path would lead. He didn't know if they could fix what had been broken, but he knew one thing for sure. Gennara was no longer just a symbol, no longer just a prize. She was a person with her own choices to make, and he would stand beside her as they both tried to figure out what came next. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the park, James and Gennaro sat in silence, not knowing what the future held, but knowing that for the first time in a long while, they weren't alone.